අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා.
Best ever sunlight. දැන් රුපියල් 200ක best ever මිලකට.
Tonight, Russia inching towards a takeover. EU threatening harsher restrictions, the US and the UK threatening with similar.
We're now targeting 70% of the Russian banking market, but also key state-owned companies.
But Russia says it's not a big deal and its troops continue to surround the Ukraine capital.
If Russia cannot use the system to do the international trade, they cannot process euro, sterling, pound, and etc.
Dance before the Geneva session. AITC MP renews calls for a federal arrangement.
Ever since the 13th Amendment was passed 34 years ago, the Tamils have rejected it being taught.
But the Foreign Secretary is confident of coming through unscathed.
This time we have really prepared very well, and we know only there will be a written submission in the Human Rights Commission this time.
Universal jurisdiction. A man arrested in the UK for a murder committed on Sri Lankan soil over 20 years ago. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Friday, the 25th of February 2022.
Lifebuoy සමට හිතකර බවට විද්‍යානුකූලව පරීක්ෂා කර ඇත. විෂ බීජ මත්තුයි සමටත් සුමුතුයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammika Kanaka. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing the world's superpowers of standing afar and watching on as his country falls into the clutches of advancing Russian troops. Though the likes of the United States, the UK and the EU bloc have threatened with severe sanctions, Russia is saying that it is not a big deal as it is expecting to increase ties with Asia instead. With well over 100 deaths from the Ukrainian side reported so far, Russian troops are beginning to occupy some parts of capital Kiev.
As Russia continues what it termed as a special military operation in the Ukraine, many European and other nations are gearing to impose sanctions and condemn the superpower. Missiles pounded the Ukrainian capital Kiev as Russian forces continue to advance their presence in the country for a second day. The Ukrainian president, however, is urging the Ukrainian military to stand their ground and protect the capital. So far, 137 Ukrainian deaths, both soldiers and civilians, have been reported. In the meantime, earlier today, the Russian troops also managed to capture Ukraine's former abandoned nuclear power plant, Chernobyl, whilst holding employees at the plant hostage. The Ukrainian officials say that the plant, which had been abandoned after its worst nuclear disaster back in 1986, had recorded increased radiation levels after the Russian troops took over the site. Amidst these developments, the Ukrainian president pleaded with the international community to do more.
This morning, we are alone in defending our country, just like yesterday. The most powerful forces in the world watch from afar. Have yesterday's sanctions persuaded Russia? We see in our skies and feel on the ground that they are not enough.
Meanwhile, the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan and Indonesia have announced that they will strengthen sanctions against Russia, while the EU stated that a package of massive and targeted sanctions have been prepared for Russia.
First, this package includes financial sanctions that cut Russia's access to the most important capital markets. We're now targeting 70% of the Russian banking market, but also key state-owned companies, including the field of defense. And these sanctions will increase Russia's borrowing costs, raise inflation, and gradually erode Russia's industrial base. Our export ban will hit the oil by making it impossible for Russia to upgrade its oil refineries, which gave actually Russia export revenues of 24 billion euros in 2019. Putin is trying to subjugate a friendly European country, and he's trying to redraw the maps of Europe by force. He must and he will fail.
However, despite the threats of sanctions, the Kremlin doesn't seem to be deterred. Kremlin officials stated that the sanctions imposed on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine would cause problems for Moscow, but not insurmountable ones, with Russia set to widen its trade and economic ties with Asian countries. However, experts believe that the impact of the sanctions would be like a double-edged blade.
The Western European countries are probably the most important buyer for the Russian resources and energy. So if Russia cannot use the system to do the international trade, they cannot process euro, sterling, pound, and etc., which means European countries will have a higher cost or more trouble to buy Russian resources. Then we're going to see a colder weather, higher price affecting American allies. I think this is probably West European countries wouldn't want to see.
He also called for more tension on the international commodity market.
Both Ukraine and Russia are probably two of the most important suppliers for the commodities, especially the agricultural product. Russia and Ukraine are both the most important supplier for the wheat and also sunflower seeds oil and etc. For the rest part of the whole world, we're thinking their price at food and energy will be greatly affected by this conflict.
In the meantime, Foreign Secretary Admiral Professor Jainath Columbage gave Sri Lanka's stance with regard to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict.
If someone is invading another country, principally it is wrong. But it doesn't mean that we can just simply say it is right or wrong. We need to really find. Now, at the same time, Russia is also feeling insecure when the NATO expansion is coming to the doorsteps. Missiles, radar systems are being installed around them. They also feel insecure. Now, this is the insecurity of one country leading to the insecurity of a region. That is why I said the world should have handled this issue more carefully, more differently, without allowing it to escalate into this situation. Historically, this region has been changing hands in power from kings to the Tsars and to the USSR. So it's a very complicated matter. We are monitoring because without knowing the situation, without knowing what is the reason, without knowing the progress, we can't do things. So we have to wait and see. And also we have to see whether we are going to respond as a region, whether we are going to respond as SAARC, whether we are going to respond as BIMSTEC, or whether we are going to respond individually to this situation. So all these things are factors. We are very concerned about the impact on our economy. So we are monitoring the situation.
In the meantime, the Foreign Secretary is also of the view that Sri Lankan delegation heading for the 49th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council is better prepared. Addressing a media briefing on the session, Columbage noted that the government has communicated numerous inaccuracies of the Human Rights Chief's draft report and expressed hope that they will be taken into account.
This time we have really prepared very well, and we know only there will be a written submission in the Human Rights Commission this time. So the High Commissioner has prepared a draft report, and then they have actually shared it with us, and we have given our observations on the inaccuracy of some of the data contained in her report. And above all, this report is actually asking questions purely internal, domestic, political nature of an independent country. So we have categorically said that it is not right to ask this question. If there are issues regarding human rights, we are ready to face them. We are committed to find solutions to these residual issues coming from a long drawn out conflict. Now, I also want to say Sri Lanka is a victim of terror twice in the recent history. We have not supported terrorism at all. Now, a victim of terror is now taken to task by the international institution. We feel it is totally unfair because the people who actually carried out these dastardly crimes are scot-free. They are not even asked any question. This is the dichotomy that we are facing right now. We feel that Sri Lanka does not deserve the attention of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And also, we must say that human rights must be looked at not as directed towards an individual country. At least the comparison must be made in the region. In that sense, I can say very proudly, Sri Lanka is the most peaceful country and upholding human rights in this whole region when you compare with other countries. And right now, the policy of the government is to find solutions to the residual questions coming out of the long drawn out conflict in a tangible, measurable, and verifiable manner so that We are not only giving pledges to the international community saying we will do it, we are telling we have done it. We have done amendment to the PTA. We have released 81 long-term detainees who were kept under the PTA, and we have released 92.4% of the land occupied by the armed forces at the end of the war.
Foreign Secretary Admiral Professor Jayanath Kolambage also touched on the new issues brought up by the UNHRC on Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is discussing about a new constitution. Now, this new constitution is in draft stage and it is not yet made public. It has not been submitted to the parliament. Now, the Human Rights Commissioner is asking about our constitution. So this is a new thing. Why are they asking a question within the ambit of the government of Sri Lanka and the people of Sri Lanka?
The Foreign Secretary also gave an update on the number of LTT detainees currently in custody.
I think there are about 83 more LTTE related detainees in some form of custody. Now we are working to release as many as possible because we also agree that it is not fair to keep anyone in detention for a longer period without even being charged. That is why we wanted to amend the PTA as quickly as possible so that mistakes that successive governments have done, we will not repeat them. This is for the benefit of the people.
Parliamentarian of Ahila Ilange Tamil Congress, Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam, says that there is a high chance that majority of the Tamil parliamentarians might vote in favour of the new constitution to be presented in Parliament in the future. MP Ponnambalam also criticises the Tamil National Alliance for accepting the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, especially with its leader, MP R. Sambandhan, rejecting it as insufficient when the amendment was being passed 34 years ago. He insists that a federal arrangement in Sri Lanka is the only way.
Ever since the 13th Amendment was passed 34 years ago, the Tamils have rejected it in toto. In fact, the main political party that had a resounding mandate in 77, the TULF at that time, wrote to the Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi on the 28th of October 1987, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and the Provincial Council Bill, these two acts in the form of bills, had been tabled in Parliament, saying that India must intervene and stop the 13th Amendment from being passed in Parliament. And the Provincial Council's bill must also be stopped because it didn't come anywhere close to addressing Tamil concerns given the sort of losses that had taken place at that time. If you are saying not to pass the legislation because it is so poor, what that effectively means is that it was not even considered a starting point. And 34 years later, for those same people, Mr. Sambandhan was one of the signatories as the vice president of the TULF when they wrote to Rajiv Gandhi then, to have those same individuals headed by one of those signatories doing a complete U-turn and asking that it be implemented. I mean, if you ask for it to be implemented, means that you have accepted it. If you are, in fact, not prepared to consider it a starting point, it doesn't matter whether the 13th Amendment exists or not. So to, in fact, say that they want it implemented very clearly shows that there is this danger of these Tamil parties that are aligned with India very closely have, in fact, settled for the 13th Amendment as the basis for a solution to Sri Lanka.
In the meantime, on Sri Lanka's constitutional history, Ahila Ilankai Tamil Congress Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam had this to say.
Ever since the British left Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka claims independence, all three constitutions of quote-unquote independent Sri Lanka were rejected by the Tamils. In 1978, when the Second Republican Constitution was also promulgated, we very clearly did not take part in the making of it because the request to consider a federal arrangement was rejected immediately. Tamils taking part in the constitution-making process and actually supporting it is fundamental and crucial to close the chapter on the ethnic conflict.
MP Ponnambalam was, however, less than impressed by the prospect of Tamil MPs voting in favour of a new constitution which would also include elements of the 13th Amendment.
When Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who's going to bring a new constitution at the end of this month, includes the provisions of the 13th Amendment, the Tamils in Parliament, a majority, will support it. And there is a danger that the Sinhala Buddhist nationalist agenda would very conveniently be fulfilled the moment a majority of the Tamil parliamentarians represent the Northeast support that new constitution, because for the first time in history, you will have a constitution that has come into effect with the Tamils consenting.
We'll see you shortly. Stay with us. back. This is First at 9. Now, dozens of Ukrainian people in Sri Lanka also gathered in front of the Russian embassy today, voicing their opposition against the Russian invasion of their country.
Dozens of Ukrainians gathered in front of the Russian embassy in Colombo today. Their purpose was to oppose Russia's military action in Ukraine and show solidarity with the Ukrainian people. While condemning Russia, they issued a plea to the international community to do more.
Several years ago in Chechnya, in Georgia, Georgia, and now it's continuing in Ukraine. We should stop it because it will grow this world. We should protect Ukraine. We should protect our family. Capital of Ukraine in Europe country. It's now bombing. It's not a joke. It's not a fun. It's bombing and killing civil people.
Russia wants to start a war. We had many of military troops around Ukraine since the last year. Everybody knew that it can be started, but we didn't believe it. But Putin wanted to start it. Russian people do not want the war. They are right now acting. They are saying that they do not want to have war with their neighbors, with the nation that was really close to them, was brotherhood for them. And right now, world should act right now.
We really want to support our friends from Ukraine. We really want to support and say to the whole world that we are against this war.
Now, during his visit to France, Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires had discussed ways of strengthening partnerships between Sri Lanka and the EU on several fronts, such as value-added exports, investments on priority sectors and improving connectivity. With the UNHRC sessions looming, he also updated the French Senate on a slew of measures that are currently underway in the island pertaining to development and reconciliation.
Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires, who is currently in France, participated in the breakfast meeting recently with the chair and members of the France-Sri Lanka Friendship Group in a Senate of France as a guest of honor. During the meeting, Professor Pires said that the country, which was severely affected from the COVID-19 pandemic, following loss of tourism income and decline in foreign remittances, is now seeing a gradual recovery as well as a steady revival of the economic enterprise. The minister briefed French senators on a slew of measures currently underway in Sri Lanka relating to development and reconciliation. He said that the second interim report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry to investigate, inquire into and report or take necessary actions on findings of preceding commissions or committees appointed to investigate into human rights violations, serious violations of international humanitarian law and other such offences has been submitted to the President. The Foreign Minister said that the amendments pertaining to the 42-year-old Prevention of Terrorism Act that presented to the Parliament early this month is expected to be debated in the first week of March. A range of issues relating to the economy, investment procedures applicable to the port city, the health and education systems of the country, labour matters, gender initiatives and foreign policy perspectives were also discussed. Meanwhile, the Foreign Minister also met with the Commission of the European Union for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, at the French Foreign Ministry in Paris. Professor Pires discussed with the EU Commissioner the strengthening of the partnerships between Sri Lanka and the European Union with regard to the value-added exports such as garments, flavoured teas, spices, including cinnamon and pepper, fisheries products, gems and jewellery. Further, strengthening partnerships in respect of investments to sectors such as hospitality, information technology, food processing, power and energy and the production of pharmaceuticals were also discussed during the meeting. The discussions also touched on health policy cooperation, connectivity among ports and harbours in the region, vocational training, digitalization and other aspects of people-to-people connect as well. The European Commissioner told the Foreign Minister, Professor G.L. Pires, that the EU is increasingly outward in reaching out to countries around the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, and that there is clear synergies in the areas of activity identified by the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka. In relation to the expansion of Sri Lanka's trade with the EU, the bloc's ambassador to Sri Lanka, Denny Chaibi, shared his views while speaking to Indivari Amuwatta on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24.
The thing that struck me even more now that I live here is that everything that grows in Sri Lanka is the best. You have the best cinnamon in the world, and in this regard, the EU now is going to protect the geographical indication. So there will be a pure Ceylon cinnamon, and only Sri Lanka will be able to use that term. So that means that the high price of cinnamon will remain or can go even higher because there's this quality label recognized by the EU. So this is a fantastic marketing tool, and it helps Sri Lanka on the map of quality rather than quantity. But we could do that with the tea. The tea is the best in the world. We could do that with the pepper. We could do that with the ginger. We could do that with the tambili.
Now, Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Peiris, meanwhile, also addressed the Ministerial Forum for Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific held recently in Paris. He explained the positive development the country had made during COVID-19 and the country's focus towards a more resilient green economy.
Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Peiris addressed the Ministerial Forum for Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, which was held at the Conference Centre for the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs in Paris recently. This was part of a program of the French presidency of the Council of the European Union. The Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka participated in the roundtable discussion covering global challenges in the fields of health, climate, biodiversity and the oceans. Some of the other topics dealt with included connectivity and digital issues, security and defence. Professor Peiris explained to the foreign ministers present that the policy adopted by Sri Lanka for the control of COVID-19 and attributed its success to the perceptive balance which underpinned the country's strategy. He added that administering the 2-vaccine dose regime and the booster throughout the country received the highest priority and accounted for the significant protection extended to the population. Lockdowns were resorted to sparingly and selectively in the interest of preservation of livelihoods. The Foreign Minister described the pioneering role of Sri Lanka in ocean-related matters as the current chair of BIMSTEC and the co-chair of the Indian Ocean Rim Association. He referred to the widespread recognition of the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management and Sri Lanka's success in the preservation of mangroves in particular, an achievement explicitly noted at COP26, which through acknowledgement of Sri Lanka as a Commonwealth Blue Charter champion. Minister Peiris also made a special mention of the cultural heritage of Sri Lanka with its emphasis on the complementary nature of economic development and preservation of the environment, which is the cornerstone of Sri Lanka's commitment to the green economy. He further stated that sustainability in the exploitation of fisheries and other marine resources is central to the economic well-being of the island nation. Other aspects of immediate relevance to Sri Lanka, he said, are enhanced connectivity in respect of trade and investment, education and cultural links, the promotion of tourism, as well as intelligence gathering and sharing.
Now, the War Crimes team of the Metropolitan Police in the UK has arrested a suspect pertaining to a Sri Lankan's murder committed on Sri Lankan soil over 20 years ago.
The Metropolitan Police in the UK say that they have arrested a suspect in connection with a murder committed in Sri Lanka in the year 2000. Officers from the War Crimes team, a part of the Counter-Terrorism Command of the Met Police, had arrested a 48-year-old man at an address in Nottinghamshire on Tuesday, as part of what the Met Police said was a proactive operation. It, however, did not mention the nationality of the suspect, though it is speculated that it is a Sri Lankan. The Met Police say that the suspect was arrested on suspicion of offences under Section 51 of the International Criminal Court Act 2001. They say that the suspect was taken into custody and has since been released under investigation pertaining to the alleged murder of a journalist, Milvagana Nimalarajan. Further, people are urged to come forward with information pertaining to the alleged murder. The statement by the Met Police says that its War Crimes Unit is committed to investigating and bringing justice to anyone who may fall under the UK's jurisdiction and who is suspected of committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide or torture anywhere in the world. When the matter was put to the Foreign Secretary today, he had this to say.
I'm not aware of this particular incident. Now, this universal jurisdiction, that is invoking universal jurisdiction, is another very debatable topic in the world. Any country can use this as an excuse to target people of another country. So there is no justice in that. There is no fair play in that. Now, we do see that the evidence gathering mechanism as proposed by the 46/1 by the United Nations Human Rights Commission is an endeavor to allow the universal jurisdiction to be exercised by competent jurisdictions in the world, namely, especially the Western countries. So there is a very big danger in that. So we need to be prepared for that.
3 newly appointed ambassadors to Sri Lanka presented their credentials to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today. Among them were Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to Sri Lanka, Khalid Nasser Suleimani Alameri, and Ambassador of the United States to Sri Lanka, Julie Chung. Further, Ambassador of Libya to Sri Lanka, Nasser Al-Fuljani, also presented credentials to the head of state today. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.